Welcome to RPI's CloudSuite Tech Talk series. My name is Keith Wayland, and I'm here to introduce today's presentation on CloudSuite for Public Sector. We have two excellent presenters for you here today. One is our very own Director of Public Sector, Mr. Joe Hoover, who's been working to implement ERP successfully in public sector for over 30 years, as well as one of our star project managers, Ms. Barbie Hunley. If you enjoyed today's session, please know that we have these Tech Talks every Friday at noon Eastern, and you can see what's new on our schedule on the Work Out Loud events page. Before we get started, please also be aware that we welcome questions. Just type them into the Q&A chat box at the bottom of your screen. We'll wait till the end of the session to take them so as to not interrupt the flow of our presenters. And with that, I give you Joe and Barbie.
Good morning, everyone. Joe, you're on mute if you want to unmute yourself.
Good morning, everyone. This is Joe Hoover, and I'd like to thank Keith for the introduction and thank everyone here for being with us on CloudSuite for Public Sector. What's in store today is several important topics we want to talk about. The first one is why cloud for public sector. We'll briefly talk about the cloud and the cloud environment. Then we'll move on to Infor CloudSuite for public sector, specifically at a high level, the advantages of moving to Infor CloudSuite. We'll talk a little bit about the journey ahead, the things that we want to consider as we move towards a migration to V11. Also, we'll talk a little bit about important considerations, things that are important for you to think about in that journey ahead. We'll talk briefly about the RFP, if that is something your organization is required to do. We'll dive into that a little bit and talk more about activities and information you can look or acquire in order to perform this journey ahead. And finally, we'll wrap up with any questions that you might have. Now, let's talk a little bit about why cloud for public sector. But more importantly, let's talk a little bit about the historical barriers to cloud adoption. And as you can see, there are 6 key areas here. The first one primarily being security and data privacy. As a cloud has matured, the concerns around data and security privacy have diminished. And in fact, when we hear about more current breaches in data, that it has occurred on on-premise systems more than on the cloud environment. Also, a historical barrier to cloud adoption has been the control of the software itself, the solution, and the infrastructure it represents. So there's always been that feeling that if I'm in control, then I can make sure that my destiny is defined. Also, another historical barrier is integration and interfaces with the current applications. That the feeling is that they're more complex and not easily accessible or assembled into the cloud type environment. Also, sunk costs. When we talk about sunk costs, in already investments around the data servers and data centers that are currently in place for on-prem. Now, when we think about the cloud suite or moving to your ERP to the cloud, we're talking about a portion of the overall cloud strategy. So when we talk about sunk cost here, it's not that we're eliminating the entire cost of your data center or your data servers. We're just preventing increased costs that are associated as you move from one version of the ERP system to the next. Also, a historical barrier has been job security, but in the sense there that we're moving individuals away from the tactical support of data infrastructure to more strategic roles. And last and least is the customizations that have been historical barrier. Customizations as a result of the application itself not meeting all the needs of the client requirements or legacy business processes that had to be built into the current software and current solution. So those have been the historical barriers to cloud adoption. When we talk about the drivers, reasons why people are moving to the cloud, it's kind of the reverse of that. And as we talk about the historical barriers, they have also been historical barriers to operational efficiency. So as we look at the cloud adoption drivers, there are really 4 key areas to consider there. As ERP solutions become increasingly more complex as they become more complex and sophisticated, not complex in terms of usability, but complex in terms of features and functionalities that they represent. And when you introduce machine learning and artificial intelligence, the infrastructure landscape and architecture becomes much more complex. And organizations are finding that when they go to the cloud, those additional complexities are eliminated because it is now all maintained in the cloud. When we talk about reliability and uptime, the Infor CloudSuite Solutions backbone is AWS, Amazon Web Services. And we all know that that is a very stable, very secure environment. Not only that, the uptime of AWS is extremely high. Folks that are moving from on-prem to the cloud will realize that they no longer have to worry about data redundancy, server redundancy, or failover. That's all taken care of from the AWS backbone perspective. Now let's talk a little bit about multi-tenant. And over the life cycle of the cloud, we've gone from hosted applications to single tenant cloud to multi-tenant. And it's in the multi-tenant cloud environment where you really see the best of all circumstances, in the sense that the application itself, the architecture itself, represents a single instance of the software application serving multiple customers. What that means and the advantages of that is a total reduction of cost to support that application across multiple customers. There's a shared infrastructure, and it permits a consolidated update. When the application itself is updated, it impacts and is done once, and all customers as part of that application can reap the benefits of that update. Also, because of that, the vendors benefit from the ability to streamline software development. There is one version of the application in which to address and which to worry about, and it provides increased adaptability and increased agility from that perspective. Now let's talk a little bit about the key advantage of moving to the multi-tenant cloud environment, and that's the application updates. Typically, they are published, and for the Infor CloudSuite, they are published monthly. Major upgrades are eliminated. What we mean by that, there are no longer annual upgrades, there are no longer cyclical upgrades. When you think about it from a more
So it's definitely more streamlined. Joe, I know I can hop in and help with this. I just went live with a client where we really experienced the benefits of this push. So like Joe was saying, now what Infor does is they actually push out monthly updates. So you don't have to go hunt down a patch that maybe you had forgotten about, or you're 2 versions behind on a form. And it really allows those major interruptions. It streamlines that. And my biggest suggestion, I know that this might sound a little scary, right, for people who are very used to installing a patch in your train or your dev environment and testing it and then in production. Infor is really great about releasing these notes that will be impacted. So all of the systems and all of the screens that will be impacted, they release those notes well ahead of time. So my biggest suggestion is be proactive. Please go out and read those notes. And ideally, you've already prioritized, some of your business processes. So maybe it's month end, maybe it's year end, maybe it's obviously all of us, payroll is near and dear to our hearts. So just going through and parsing through those notes and really identifying anything that could potentially impact your team, and then you test it. As soon as that comes out, it comes out, I think, on the 3rd Saturday of every month. You go in and you test it with your end users and you move on. And it's really great because you already have all of those updates in one place at the same time, and you're never behind on those versions. Anything you want to add to?
Yeah, thanks, Barbie. And when you think about it, this will be your last upgrade of your ERP system. you will not need to go to version 12. There won't be a version 12. Once you move to Infor CloudSuite version 11, it will be the last major upgrade or migration of your ERP system. When we think about it in the context of Windows 10, there have actually been, our PC operating system, there has actually been 26 versions of Windows out there. Windows 10 went live 5 years ago. There will not be a Windows 11 version. This is the operating model of the future, and it's here. And again, the significance of this is there won't be a version 12 migration in the future. Once you get to version 11, these continuous updates eliminate the need for another major version upgrade. Now with that, let's move into what specifically you can look forward to in an Infor CloudSuite solution. Barbie?
Sure. So some of the great capabilities of CloudSuite are listed here. And I think the biggest one is we all live and breathe on our phones, right? We have these devices in our hands, and we're used to kind of that latest and greatest software. And that's definitely something that Infor CloudSuite allows us. So that user experience, it has an incredibly responsive view. It's role-based. It's incredibly easy to navigate. And it's dashboard driven. So on your landing page, you can actually see all of these pretty pictures to see maybe you're behind on payments, or maybe there are some outstanding invoices. And we can really create those dashboards to be what the end users want them to be. As well as that user interface, the self-service tools are incredibly advanced. So even that person who maybe isn't living in the system all day, every day, that self-service capability is very streamlined and easy for them to use. It's just a few clicks of a button. And I think one of the coolest things, and where Infor has certainly invested a lot of their time, is around the process orientation. So there are delivered action requests and workflows that are truly role-based, that are true across pretty much all industries. That of course you can tweak and make a few, have a few extensions or modifications, but out of the box, these work seamlessly within the environment. Flexible GL structure, I'm going to get into that in the next slide, but I will say that that's something that my clients are probably most excited about, is a little bit of the freedom of the chains of maybe having to do smart numbering or being restricted to a certain number of accounts due to reporting. Due to their reporting needs, they wanted something a little bit more robust. And along those lines, HR is no longer really beholden to that financial structure. There's an expansive real-world HR structure that really can now be created within GHR. And lastly, and perhaps the most important is that what Joe had referred to previously is that seamless integration. There's delivered integration between all of these modules that you're instantaneously, as soon as you place a requisition, it's issued as a PO and it's out to the vendor within a matter of minutes. So that integration capability is really, really expanded here. So like I said, my clients are incredibly excited about this expanded GL functionality. So any of you who perhaps came from the version 10 of Infor Lawson, that's what I have up above. Is so with the company accounting unit account. And then down below is version 11. And really what this is trying to explain is that freedom from smart numbering, right? So a lot of you have to report to different levels, perhaps as this example suggests, to the region or facility or department. And you had to smart number that within your accounting unit, and then you had to probably export that to Excel and then probably parcel that out. And I can only imagine how time consuming that was. And now within CloudSuite, you actually are able to just create those as their own individual dimensions. So you no longer have to have that smart numbering and then that breakdown. You can actually report to any one of these single dimensions. And I do want to give credit to this slide to my colleagues who actually just did a tech talk a few weeks ago on the Global Ledger Sandbox. I'd highly suggest, if this is really getting you excited, I'd highly suggest taking a look at that tech talk. Another great advantage and advancement within Infor CloudSuite is this new capability of fund accounting. Now, what fund accounting does is it really seeks to hold clients accountable, or customers accountable, rather than focusing on profitability. So what it does is it really records a resource's funds that maybe has been designated by another body or a grant or donations. And it really allows you to track it based upon those funds that have been given for that specific resource. So again, this isn't a profitability module. It's really a way for you to be held accountable for those funds and then being able to report out to those bodies. So this is a really cool feature. And again, one I want to give my my colleagues credit for. If this is something that you're interested in, I would suggest taking a look at the Financial Differences Tech Talk. They do a bit of a deeper dive, and they will do a much better job than I will. But just wanted to point out that this is certainly one of the functionalities that is being used heavily in the public sector. And now to everyone's favorite topic, compliance. So Infor recently came out with this tool, the GRC, which is governance, risk, and compliance. And really, this is a tool that once configured, it continuously monitors and controls any breakdowns and risks within the software. So those can be anything from segregation of duties. So someone that maybe submitted a requisition or created a PO also probably shouldn't be doing the receiving. So spitting out reports to identify those. Maybe access to sensitive data. Maybe someone in finance, they realize within the security that they also can see some payroll data, and that's probably not something that you'd like. Any unauthorized purchases, maybe GL postings that are improper that you've been able to flag and identify. Any configuration setup changes that weren't authorized or you weren't aware were going to occur. All of this can be flagged, and auditing reports can be spit out and reviewed on a weekly basis, a monthly basis, and it really helps you. It'll help your auditors, and it helps you report out to whoever your governing body is or the agencies that you have to report to. These are now ways that you can spit out a report and say, here's how we are monitoring our system. And all of it's done automatically. You do a setup up front, and then it kind of runs in the background based upon the parameters that you decide to set. So, what is the end game? The end game for you is, we want to create freedom for you to be more strategic and really embracing those growth opportunities. So that's what Infor CloudSuite really allows you to do. It allows you to be to focus more on those opportunities of growth by making this a little bit more seamless and streamlined. So allowing you to focus more on the day-to-day and long-term goals that you have. And it also allows you to compete with your surrounding bodies and your surrounding cities or counties or districts. This is the way of the future. So it allows you to kind of keep up to speed with your competitors, if you will. The additional reporting capabilities, Infor does have a software called Burst that is utilized heavily and is an incredibly powerful tool. And we'll actually be telling you at the end of this presentation, that's the next upcoming Tech Talk is about Burst. So a lot of great capabilities there, but allowing you to really report out to, again, those governing bodies or a board or whomever it might be, and even pushing it out to customers, right? And being able to show, hey, here's what we're doing for you. And then I can't stress enough the importance of those integration capabilities. So the delivered functionality with the integration, the ease of the tools within Infor CloudSuite, and then some of those delivered formats. So that 834 structure that you're usually pushing to your benefits providers, for different information, that's already within the system, and it's very easy to kind of plug in and push out. So some of the great opportunities within CloudSuite. And Joe, I think you're going to talk a little bit about what the journey ahead may look like for our friends.
Thanks, Barbie. As we talk about this, the migration to version 11 is a strategic initiative. It's a major initiative within your organization. And one of the things that there's a lot of planning involved in that, but one of the most important things from that strategic initiative is looking at your application roadmap, your strategic business application roadmap, and seeing where the V11 application fits into that application roadmap. Those are typically 5 years. Some organizations have, less time, and others have more time. But it's looking at the V11 itself and seeing where it will fit into your strategic roadmap. And what we mean by that is you're assessing your current systems, including your V10 or earlier versions of the Lawson Infor system, and seeing what pieces and parts of that system are currently helping your organization, areas where you need to improve your capabilities from a business processing, business strategy perspective. So what you're doing here is you're assessing where your current application portfolio sits and how that can benefit from a V11 implementation. In addition, there is a lot of new capabilities within the V11 CloudSuite application, and you want to take the time to look at those new capabilities and see where those capabilities can help from a functional business process perspective, look at where those new capabilities can retire legacy systems that are currently in place that may be able to be retired with the implementation of those new capabilities. So it really involves understanding the V11 application and where it fits in your current application structure. In addition to that, when we talk about the application itself, the V11 application, we want to look at the rollout of that application. We want to look at the future scope and functionality of how we deploy the V11, whether it's incrementally or all at once. So that plays into it as another important aspect of the strategic initiative. In addition to that, we want to look at the workflows and reporting requirements currently in place. Again, that falls to the business processes. As you look at those and reinvestigate those, determining which processes can be optimized, that's going to impact the workflow. Reporting requirements, as Barbie mentioned, burst and other capabilities, the ease of extracting information from V11 may significantly change your current reporting requirements and how you want to move forward with extracting data from the system. And finally, as I mentioned before, is the deployment schedule as it relates to how you deploy the V11 implementation across multiple phases, multiple ways. We'll get to that in a second. That's something to consider. But please also remember that delays have implications. The longer your organization waits to implement V11, the longer it avoids the opportunity to take organizational advantage of all the good things a V11 implementation represents. Now, from a strategic perspective, we want to engage the business user. We want to engage and educate the leaders in your organization, from your C-level individuals down to the leads within each of your processing areas. It's important that the leaders in your organization understand the capabilities of V11 and be able to understand the eventual end game, if you will, of using that system. It's important to understand the new system capabilities, what's in it for them. You want to be able to document your pain points or gaps in the current system functionality, and you want to be able to list and prioritize needs, wants, and desires as a result of understanding better the V11 application itself. And also, we need to look at you need to look at your organizational skills that can support that migration. From the technology side, from an organizational perspective around project management, change management, the experience, capacity, and availability of those skill sets, the staff, will impact the vendor costs associated with the implementation of the V11 CloudSuite. Let's talk a bit about the developing a project roadmap. As you can see here, this is an example, just an example of things to consider. Here we show the CloudSuite HCM 11 implementation and the CloudSuite FSM implementation. And in this scenario, we are showing two different waves, wave one being core functionality, wave two being a non-core functionality. What determines core and non-core functionality is up to the organization looking at the V11 portfolio of solutions. So this will change between organizations, and it's just here a representative example of things to consider as you develop that project roadmap that is integrated into what I mentioned earlier, the strategic roadmap. And with that, I'd like to hand it off to Barbie. And Barbie, you recently went through an implementation with a client that actually was implementing FSM, HCM, and EAM, and it was a single phase implementation. And when we talk about developing the project roadmap, it can be phased approach, it can be overlaid phased approach, or it could be a single phase approach. So Barbie, you want to talk a little bit about that project?
Yeah, sure. So typically what RPI and Infor suggests is, that phased approach. So usually, going one before the other. But with this client, they had a homegrown system, meaning that for, decades and decades. So they had just built such dependencies upon each area that it was going to be really, really difficult for us to unmarry those, specifically with regards to, time entry and assigning perhaps, work orders. We had to have users assign work orders immediately and then have that really flow all the way through, all the way to finance. And on top of all this, they took this as an opportunity. They did exactly what we are preaching. They took this as an opportunity to completely redo their GL structure and their chart of accounts. So there were so many changes that were happening simultaneously that it just made sense for us to kind of do that big bang, if you will. The only differentiation, I guess, is we did go live with kind of timekeeping and HR first 1 week before we went live with everything else. So we did do a little bit of a straddle there, but really it was a big bang. We had to have all systems up. And it worked really well for them because it made sense. So I think that's one of those, there's always an exception to a rule, and they were definitely the exception. So it's definitely something you want to consider as you're thinking about your journey. What are those intricacies? What are some of those interfaces and those dependencies like Joe had been talking about?
Thanks, Barbie. Now let's talk a little bit about Timeframe and readiness. And as I've alluded to, there really is a lot of planning involved. And when you think about it, the better an organization is able to plan out their V11 migration, the better it will be. The better the selected vendor will be able to understand the client's requirements and be able to comply and create a cost-effective implementation schedule. Now, when you look at the breakdown here, it's really a life cycle of planning. You want to first develop your approach. You want to, again, review that strategic business application roadmap, see where V11 can help in that regard, and you want to be able to map where your business processes fit into that. You want to be able to look at your current business processes. A lot of them are probably ready to be improved upon, and you want to confirm those. You also want to, again, look at the new capabilities within the V11 implementation or solution and identify and confirm those new capabilities, as we previously mentioned, where that would lie in if you will, in the deployment of the V11 solution. You want to look at the legacy systems, confirm when they will be retired or replaced based on the additional functionality you turn on within the V11 application itself. But more importantly, you also want to look at the cost benefits. The cost benefits of improving your business processes as a result of using the V11 software and solution, or looking at the cost benefits of better business processes as a result of that. Once you develop your approach, then it gives you the ability to develop the specifics, the things that will help in the implementation of the V11 project itself. What we're talking about there is a project timeline. You want to be able to, again, confirm through your strategic business application roadmap the timing and execution of the V11, whether it's phase overlap or single phase. That's a very important process, and that feeds into the staffing requirements. One of the things organizations are challenged with is the appropriate amount of staffing required to support the timeline and the activities required to implement or migrate to V11. And with all of that information already planned out, you have a better picture on what it would take from a funding perspective. those things that your organization can do in an implementation versus those things that you would need to depend on a vendor to help support. Then the last and final phase is a procure and implement. And there, if we're talking public sector, so a lot of organizations require the use of an RFP. If you exceed a certain capital threshold, an RFP, request for proposal, is required. So you have to develop that RFP. The more you have information that you have gained from developing your approach and the specifics around it, the better the RFP will be. And the more comprehensive it will be. You'll then need to issue the RFP, select the vendor, negotiate the contract, and start the implementation. So from an overall perspective, when we talk about the implementation, as you saw in the prior diagram of the FSM or HCM, they are typically anywhere from 12 months to 14 months. Sooner for other organizations, a little bit longer for others, depending on the complexity and what you're trying to accomplish in that migration. But overall, if you're looking to go live with a V11 implementation solution, it really is it's about the timing and how you are starting down that path of planning and identifying within your organization the ability to kick off the project and move forward. And with that, I want to talk about some important considerations, things to think about as you start down the path of the migration to V11. Let's talk a little bit about some organizations that will, at this point in time, consider, should we stay with Lawson Infor? Should we look at a different ERP solution? And the reasons for considering staying with your existing Lawson Infor solution, and obviously we are proponents of that, is a familiarity with your current Infor application. You have been with Lawson Infor for a while. You understand the ecosystem. You understand the support. You understand the vendor. Also, a strong advantage for staying with Lawson is a delivered migration tools, right? There's a frame of reference when moving from the existing V10 or earlier environment to the V11. There are points of references there. Also, taking advantage of the implementation accelerators within the Infor deployment methodology is a huge advantage as you migrate from your current system to the V11. And obviously, there is reduced costs and reduce change management if you're upgrading from a system you are used to using versus a new one. And for those organizations, that are thinking they need a new ERP system, when we talk about it, you are no longer, dealing with those those components down below here that really drives an organization to consider a new software solution. So from our perspective, there is significant cost savings and significant change management optimization when you continue staying with your current Infor Lawson solution. Now, Barbie, let's talk a little bit about Infor implementation advantage. And what we're saying here is that within the V11 environment, and when you move to V11, as when you had originally moved to the Lawson from your legacy systems, there are best practices inherent into the system. There's best practices inherent, best processes and practices inherent in the V11 system. And what we're seeing overall on an average is that 60% of the application typically comes from core, 30% are differentiators, and 10% are unique. And so Barbie, from the recent project you were associated with, how did that kind of lay out from that perspective?
Sure, thanks, Joe. And I think the important thing to note here is that this is the law of averages, right? So that 60, 30, 10 might not be true across all areas, and that's certainly something we found with my most recent client. And what I mean when I say that is maybe HR is 80% core and then 5% differentiators and 5% unique. And maybe finance is a little bit different. So I think it's just kind of across the board, this is what the breakdown ends up being. But, for us, it was very true that HR was probably, 75% core, maybe 25% differentiators. And that was more so, creating some custom views and, some configuration console changes, and then really 5% unique, if at all. Whereas finance, just because of some of the regulatory and state requirements that they had, they were a little different. Their core was probably 50%, and then maybe 30% differentiators and 20% unique. So, I would say across the board, we still stayed probably within this realm, but each area is going to be different, and that's also going to depend on the company. But I think that this offers us a really great framework to start from. And it at least, certainly for the accountants of the world, it gives them a number to kind of strive for and look for. And then it helps you guys be able to really prioritize.
Thanks, Barbie. Now, as we talk about the Infor implementation advantage, one of the advantages is the Infor business process model. And what I mean by that is there are core out-of-the-box end-to-end business processes that are same for public sector, for retail, for manufacturing, for healthcare. As you see these in front of you, record to report, source to settle, billing to collections, recruit to onboard, and the many others on this screen, they are common business processes, they are common business activities that are across all suites and all industries. What that represents is that there is a process model that helps the client. The purpose of this is to help the client understand as quickly as possible what the V11 solution looks like, what it represents from a business processing perspective. From that end, it really relates to a 4-level strategy here. The first one being the high-level end-to-end business process groups. The second level is the end-to-end business processes. So within the record to report, there are individual processes that comprise that particular end-to-end business process, and within each of those boxes you then can expand upon the business processes activities related to this. And the example on the right is journal entry to post. So it shows the traditional business flow, and this is the same sort of diagramming technique that you have seen in current flow analysis or future state analysis kind of diagrams, where the organization is listed on the left and there's a flow of information on the right, decision trees and those kinds of things. If you were to click on one of these individual boxes, it would bring up the description of that process and, more importantly, bring up the test scripts. And within the test scripts, it shows the activities, the entries into the individual screens and processes that allows that process to execute from end to end. Now, one of the other things that we want to talk about as an important consideration is the partnering relationships. And when we talk about that, the implementation success depends on these 3 distinct operating organizations. You have the client, obviously, the vendor, software, Infor, and the implementation services vendor. And the 3 of these particular individual organizations work together to successfully create an implementation strategy and implementation outcome. When we talk about an implementation vendor, the things you want to consider, the things you want to look at in terms of the implementation vendor is deep experience and ability, successful implementation, and satisfied clients. So you want the success of your V11 implementation truly rests with the implementation vendor you select. So you want to be able to understand that vendor's capabilities and feel comfortable that that's the right vendor for you. So those are the kind of the important considerations as we move forward with the V11 implementation. Now let's move on to the RP. Sorry,
I was just going to say, I was going to say, just before we move on, I think, certainly from past experiences and clients that I've worked with, one of the reasons this has worked well is, we as RPI have been able to develop and really strengthen the relationship with the Infor Client Services Manager, or CSM, and develop that relationship and really be able to work your issues or escalation points that you have from 2 sides, both from RPI and then partnering with that Infor partner. But, we're kind of put in that unique position of being able to really defend kind of all fronts. We're there for you. We're there to make sure that you have the best system possible, and we're going to work our darndest to make sure that happens. But also making sure that we're following up with Infor, utilizing our connections there, and holding them accountable, making sure that we're able to really partner with them and see through those, like I said, escalation points that you may need. So I've been very fortunate to be able to be successful with that in past projects. So just to give a little bit of example. And I think I'm going to go in and talk about the first half of everyone's favorite, which is the RFP. A very simple process, right, Joe?
Yeah. Not really.
Yeah. So RFP development, right? It's quite daunting. But the biggest thing here that I have learned through this RFP process is scope, scope, scope. The scope is so important. Being able to clearly define and be concise, or if you don't have the privilege of being concise, but that clarity is incredibly important, because what it allows is it allows your vendors to know exactly what your end goals are. So really it helps refine who's applying. You know, you want to make sure you get that white noise out, because you might end up having 40 RFPs that are 200 pages each that you're going to have to go through. So the more clear you can be, the better the vendors are going to be able to speak to your needs and really get down to the details for you, so you can have the most educated decision that you can. So that concise is ideal, but you know, sometimes you do have to get a little bit more into the weeds. And really preparing for the RFP, some of those key elements, like we said, the scope and the approach that's going to work for you and the environment of your company, right? Outlining that, being honest about who you are, so that, you know, you find a true partner. These are people that are going to be working with you elbow to elbow for a few years, probably. And then WISE, for those of you who aren't familiar, WISE is going to be workflows, interfaces, customizations, and extensions. So any inventory that you can create of those interfaces, of existing, you know, customizations that you may have that perhaps there are opportunities to remove those, that's only going to behoove you as you go through this process. Certainly items may be removed or added to that list, but anything you can do up front really is going to be advantageous to you. And then, you know, outlining any reports or analytics expectations. If you have to get in front of a body and you need X, Y, and Z information, say that. If you have regulatory reports that you absolutely have to have and they have to be down to a certain specification, be honest about that. Put that in there, and then that'll allow the vendors to kind of come back with maybe some sample reports that'll hopefully, you know, wow you as to, you know, their capabilities of answering your requirements. And then being honest with yourself about what those resource effort estimates are. I know Joe had mentioned that previously, and we'll talk about it again. That's so incredibly important. Understanding truly what resources you're going to be able to commit to this project, and then that's going to allow you to understand, okay, maybe I need a team of 10 vendors, or, you know, 10 consultants, and not just 4, based on the capabilities that we have in-house. And then probably my biggest advice is that documentation of process flows, because that goes hand in hand with the scope. But the more detailed you can be there about current and then potential future, and you may not know the future, right? So maybe you do current, and maybe you just circle and identify some gaps or opportunities, but really taking this as an opportunity to do a deep dive into those business processes, because that's what we would do. You know, we're going to come in and we're going to want to look at those business processes, identify, you know, what's going to work, what's not going to work, where we can create greater efficiencies. So any work that you've done up front saves you time on the back end. So, you know, we are very much about that proactivity, that proactive approach. And Joe, I think you might talk about some of everyone's favorite topic, you know, the purse.
The options. The RFP itself, as the RFP is issued, there are really 3 types of pricing options. The time and materials not to exceed, and fixed price. There is a huge tendency in RFPs for public sector to be based on fixed price, right? There's the organization wants to be able to budget, and there is an expectation that the fixed price will help the organization maintain budget that is requested up front. But one of the things that it will help establish that budget is the V11 pre-planning activities. When we talk about the V11 pre-planning activities, we've kind of talked about it, and we have actually other CloudSuite tech talks that get specifically into what the V11 pre-planning activities represent. Whether you do them yourselves or you have folks help you do it, the better you understand how your organization will use the V11 software solution, it's important to know that up front. It eliminates the guesswork of the migration cost, and you can provide a budget then within your organization that will allow you to realize all the benefits that you want you out of that. Now, the implementation challenge from a vendor perspective is on fixed price. It's fixed schedules, fixed methodology, fixed resources, fixed scope. So as we try to move forward on a fixed price contract, as we go through the implementation, any of those areas, any of those attributes change, naturally require a change in the implementation costs themselves. And when we think about that, what are ways that we can prevent those impacts to the implementation costs? Those things that would change the fixed agreement up front to be something different. And what typically, here are the four kind of key drivers of things that impact implementation costs once the implementation is underway. One of them is an anticipated change in scope. You know, as you start the implementation, as you go through the design phase, there's a realization that some additional scope is required. That's a risk to the implementation. And again, the way to mitigate that risk is going through all of that pre-planning activities up front, so that there is not that possibility of a change in scope. The other thing is the resource needs, abilities, and availability of your team. As the project is implemented, there's strategies around reducing risks around those, backfilling your critical resources, understanding that there could be other initiatives underway that could distract your resources. The client itself doesn't have the flexibility as a vendor implementation team in replacing folks if they're out on medical leave or other things that causes their contributions to be less than identified during the negotiations of the contract. So that's something also to consider, and schedule deadlines are also one of those things that impacts implementation costs. That staying on top of those deadlines obviously means that there's no delays. Any delay, again, it changes the fixed schedule to during the statement of work agreement, that impacts the implementation costs related to that. Let's now talk a little bit about things and resources that you can look at as you move down that path of planning and implementation. Barbie?
Sure. So I know this might all sound overwhelming, but maybe you're excited. Hopefully you're excited. Either way, I just, we're here to answer questions. I know we're almost at the end, and you can certainly put any questions that you have in the question box. But one of the biggest things I like to remind people is you have more than you think. You have assets, you have historical knowledge within the company, and you have people that have probably been there for a while, and you should really utilize those resources, those assets, and create a team around you that you can rely on, that's really going to work well together. Review your lessons learned. That's probably the biggest thing you can do is being honest with yourself, being reflective, and going in and really truly reviewing those lessons learned and reviewing those RFPs. And I'm a big proponent of maybe not always looking at the successful ones, which ones were there a lot of challenges, and obviously ideally those are the ones that created the most lessons learned, but look at what was successful, look at what wasn't successful, and really drive that to help create this new RFP and this new venture for you. And that comes with that being honest about what didn't work, what did work, and truly identifying those non-negotiables. What are those priorities that you absolutely have to have within your infrastructure that the vendor or software really needs to satisfy. Utilize your team to really help identify those. And again, resources, I can't stress that more. the people make the difference when it comes to this. So having that strong leadership, doing an internal assessment of your resources, making sure that the timeline is going to work with maybe any critical items that you have going on, and making sure you have the right people. But really the key here is you aren't alone. You have a team, you have infrastructure around you, and you do have historical knowledge within your company that you're going to be able to lean on. And you know, the other side of this is I remember reading an article years ago about the Coke CEO, and he said something to the extent of, you know, if Pepsi didn't exist, he wish it would. And what that means for me is, you know, competitors and looking outside, it only helps to make us better, right? It gives us an opportunity to improve. So look at other bodies, look at other districts, look at other cities and municipalities. What are they doing? What were their successful RFPs? You know, have they used Infor? You know, what was their journey like? Really read through those, as arduous of a process as that might be. You know, do your due diligence. It will end up paying off, and know that other people have gone through this process, and they've done it, you know, and they've been okay. And, you know, if possible, you know, maybe connect with some of those people, see if they can offer any guidance or advice, or, you know, maybe even share some of their lessons learned. And then, you know, for that V11 true pre-planning help, procure assistance. This is a hard process, and there are people who have done this many times. Don't go it alone. There are people out there that can certainly help. RPI does have a presentation on V11 pre-planning that Richard Stout gave a few weeks ago. And really what it does is it outlines kind of the V11 overview, really going through your business plan and your business case. What is it that you're trying to achieve? And utilizing that to really identify your project scope. As we said, that's really the crux here. And then, you know, doing those inventory of rice and Weiss, and, you know, taking a look at reporting assessments, and doing that full comprehensive executive overview. And, you know, those are all important pieces, and there are people out there who can certainly help you as you go on this endeavor. So, you know, utilizing other people's knowledge to allow you to kind of catapult your industry and your company. So I think, Joe, for that, I'm going to hand this off to you.
Thank you, Barbie. So hopefully we're here. RPI is committed to being your partner in the cloud migration. We offer a lot of different opportunities and services that may benefit your organization, but primarily from a V11 perspective, as Barbie had mentioned, our pre-planning for V11 is one of those key opportunities to help us help you in moving forward in your V11 transformation project. Now, what I'd like to do, as Barbie mentioned earlier, is do a plug for our upcoming webinar or upcoming CloudSuite Tech Talks on Burst. This is a very good session on understanding Burst and Burst capabilities, and how it will work even well with your V10 existing environment. So we strongly recommend that you take us up on viewing this Tech Talk, CloudSuite 109, happening next week. And with that, we'd like to offer any of you folks on the call here to do questions.
Thanks everyone for listening. Hope you guys were able to learn a few things. We do have a few questions that I'm just going to go ahead and run through that have come through. So Joe, I think I'm going to give this first question to you. It's, why is version 11 pre-planning so important in order to move to version 11?
Thanks, Barbie. That's a great question. And the migration to V11 is a complex upgrade, as we have kind of alluded to. Think of it more as a migration. That's not a bad thing. The inherent capabilities of V11 is best realized by taking the time to assess your current environment and take the time to chart the migration strategy uniquely tailored to your specific organizational needs. This is and should be the last client-initiated upgrade migration that you should go through as part of the is multi-tenant cloud strategy. So the pre-planning component is important, not only to understand that roadmap unique to your organization, but also, as we mentioned earlier, it helps provide a more solid budgeting estimate of what it will take to get there.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Another question, I think I might take this one. What are the challenges with the continuous update model? I would say the biggest thing, that I did allude to during the presentation was just staying on top of the release notes. You can subscribe to the knowledge base article, and the Infor is good about releasing, everything that's going to be in that most recent update that's going to be pushed to your systems. So just really staying on top of those, ensuring you have the time to be proactive, having a good, test plan in place, and then of course making the time to actually go through and test those items. But theoretically, it's really no different than the CTPs that we were used to in version 9 and 10. But this time, they're just being pushed out. So it's just a matter of that proactivity that can sometimes be challenging if you don't build it into your day-to-day schedule. Joe, I don't know if you have anything to add on that one.
No, Barbie, you did a good job.
Okay. This next one I'll take a stab at, and then Joe, I'm interested in learning more about the new GL capabilities. What's the process for getting that information? I would definitely suggest reaching out to us in the team chat. Joe and myself, while maybe we have a little finance background, I would not want to lead you astray, so we can certainly connect you with some of our finance resources, but I would also highly suggest taking a look. We've done a few previous tech talks on the finance differences as well as the finance sandbox that I would really urge you to look at, because those are really good presentations, and I may have borrowed some of that material for some of this presentation as well.
Great, Barbie, and I'd
right.
just like to, if I could just add to that, one of the key capabilities of the GL, the new GL, is the multiple dimensions, and we do have a service offering that allows that, again, as Barbie had mentioned, a GL sandbox, which really deep dives into the capabilities of the new GL structure and how your organization could benefit from that before anything else kind of transpires in the V11 planning cycle. Back to you, Barbie.
Yep, definitely. So it looks like we have two more. The next one, Joe, I think maybe I'll give this one to you. Is GRC a separate module that I need to purchase as part of the V11 upgrade?
The GRC is a new capability within the V11 solution set. It does provide additional capabilities, and I would strongly recommend it's included as part of your solution roadmap. If anyone on the phone is interested in additional information, just let us know. Send us a chat, and we'll make sure you get that information.
Great. Thanks, Joe. All right, it looks like Bill just submitted a question. He said, when implementing, should existing resources or augmented resources be utilized? How different is V11 from V10 in HCM? So that's a great question. My answer would probably be both. I definitely think you would want to use existing resources, but obviously we would suggest bringing in ourselves or an outside firm, of course, to be able to bring you up from version 10 to version 11. Version 10 and version 11 are foundationally not that different, but as far as the look and feel is very different between the two. So, version 11, Infor is really moving towards a streamlined experience for all of the users across all systems. So whether it's finance, supply chain, or HR. So the navigation is different. So, the forms, as on the HCM side, some of you may have HR 11 memorized, HR 55, all of those all of those forms will go away, but it's actually a much easier navigation tool for our end users, we have found. So I know that's a long-winded answer, Bill, but my answer would be you would definitely want to use both resources. You want your team to certainly familiarize themselves with version 11, but the tools, both the tech tools and I would argue the functional tools, are actually much easier to pick up for end users, at least in my experience. And Joe, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, Bill, I would also like to say that, you know, it is typically best practices if you can have your best team assigned to the migration project. And you can do that if there's, you know, if there's sufficient budget and time to backfill your current, you know, the current client team in the normal business processes necessary to keep the normal operations going, and then have your business leaders, your business process leaders available as most to full time as possible on the migration to ensure success on a timely implementation. So backfilling the current client resources, if possible, and if budget permits, is really the right way to go if you can do that. Barbie?
And Bill, I will put in a good word for you to bring Lid back. I'm not sure if it'll go very far, but I'll put that in for you. All right, I have one more question here. Do I have to use Infor Implementation Accelerator as part of the V11 migration? Joe, you want to take that one?
Sure. The Infor Implementation Accelerator is a tool set, and it's going through its most current revision that makes it even more capable. But it can help the organization during migrations, which is not only includes the V11 solution business flows through end-to-end business process that you saw in our presentation, but there is also other important capabilities in the overall tool set that we weren't able to cover today based on timing. So as with any of our questions, let us know if you would like more information on this topic. Just send us a chat and we'll make sure that you can get it. Barbie?
Great. Well, we are 1 minute over, so I want to make sure that we respect everyone's time, and we just really thank you guys so much for attending, and please, like we said, please reach out if you have any questions, and we wish you all a great rest of your day.